There were about 5 or 6 liberals like him, but he was the sort of king. He wrote for Look, Saturday Evening Post, the New York Times, Sunday Magazine. He wrote books about the South. He was unbelievably prolific, and he vacationed on the coast of Maine every summer with this nice little yacht. And this, so I always thought it was ironic. He wrote a 6-part series countering your dad's series, which was syndicated in far more papers than your dad's was. And it was carried in the South, which your dad's paper was not carried in the South, except for the Pittsburgh Courier. They got the exclusive rights to reprint your dad's series, and they printed all 21 parts, not just 12 like the other ones. And this is a promo. This is the Pittsburgh Courier promoting your dad's coming series, like the next week. It's a weekly. It came up, biggest black paper in the country, close to 400,000 subscribers. Every issue was passed around. They had 12, 14, 15, nobody seems to know, editions in Chicago and New York and LA, all this stuff. And that, to use red ink when we were at the Post-Gazette in the 90s was like, oh no, we're not using color because they knew how much it cost. And that's pretty crazy. And that was just a promotion. And they called him America's greatest, or America's #1 white reporter, is what your dad was called. And if you read the copy, which I don't have in front of me, it is so over the top, it's unbelievably cool, really. I mean, they knew what they were doing. And they did that, and then the next week, his series ran, and for 6 straight weeks, it appeared on the front page of the Courier all over the country. And into the South, where they would take the Courier, and the porters would take it from Pittsburgh, the black porters, and they would, sometimes they'd have to throw it off before they got it.
What year was this?
1948.
So all of this stuff at the polls was going on, like the previous page, it referred to civil disobedience, and this one referred to mob slashing.
This is what a black newspaper looked like. There was none of this. I can pretty much guarantee you that nothing that's on that front page, or the previous one, was mentioned in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, the Pittsburgh Press, or the Pittsburgh Sun-Times. White papers wrote for white people. Black papers wrote for black people. The black papers covered the lynchings, the trials, the discrimination in the armed services. They were pounding away at Truman to desegregate the armed forces. Constantly. White papers basically ignored it. And what little white papers did write about, they treated the Pittsburgh Crawfords and the Homestead Grays, right? They treated them like Sandlot teams, 2 of the greatest.
If they would mention them at all.
Yeah, if they mentioned them at all. And so everything you see on these pages was basically not ever mentioned in the white papers. So I like this guy, and it's obvious in the book if you read it. This is George Schuyler. He lived in New York. He lived next door to Duke Ellington. He lived around Duke Ellington. He literally traveled the world checking out black populations in South America, Africa, and the U.S. He took several tours across the South. H.L. Mencken called him the Black Mencken. He was considered one of the greatest journalists in the country. He wrote, let's say but let's not say every, let's say 98% of all the editorials that were written in the Pittsburgh Courier from 1926 to the early 60s were written by him. He also did 2 columns a week. He also wrote under pseudonyms. He did novels. He wrote a satire called Black No More, which was considered a tremendous Harlem Renaissance product in the late 20s, I think, early 30s. Superstar. And he had a daughter named Philippa Schuyler, and they called her. He was the Black Mencken. They called her the Black Shirley Temple. She was 4 years old, playing piano at Carnegie Hall, I think, or close to it, writing symphonies. And she became a journalist and died in a helicopter crash in Vietnam. And Alicia Keys was going to play her in a movie, which would be produced by Halle Berry. But probably it turned out that Alicia can play piano well and can't act. So that movie has not been made yet. But anyway, the Post-Gazette knew what to do with its products and with its star. Here's a brochure that it printed It sold about 10,000 copies of these for, I don't know, equivalent of a couple bucks today, all around the country. And they printed Sprigle's series, and then Harding Carter's The Other Side of Jim Crow, which really, Harding Carter did not like your dad, and went to his grave not liking him. But the Post-Gazette put both of them in this paper, whereas Carter's paper only printed Carter's side of the story. And, you know, so I mean, Carter was he was not a nice guy.
When you wrote that, that was one of the biggest shocks I think I ever had. Because I thought Harding Carter was a wonderful person. He really liked him. He had admired him. This was just so shocking that he was so, Harding Carter was so two-faced.
Yeah.
I really amazed.
Yeah, he really loved the South, and he defended it. You know, he considered what Sprigle did to be just another stunt by a, you know, parachuting Northern Yankee liberal troublemaker who, you know, didn't understand the South, never would, and, you know, and leave the South alone. We'll figure this out. We're making progress.
What's the title mean? The Other Side of Jim Crow. He's taking the side of Jim Crow?
Oh yeah, he's defending. He was defending segregation, and especially in public spaces. And he you know, explained. It was both a defense of the South and Jim Crow as segregation, legal segregation, but also an attack on the North and your dad and the arguments that the NAACP were making and other liberal Northerners.
Did he change later in his life?
No, he didn't.
Because in the
Son or
60s,
grandson. I think we're getting pretty late, and if you have any questions
Sorry.
for Bill and Ray, why don't you ask them, and then buy some books, and I think that, you know, you can get...
You have to go to bed, Bob, or what?
What?
You have to go to bed?
No.
Yes.
Could you speak, and maybe I missed it, but how did this story come to be? I mean, was it his idea? Was it an editor?
Somehow, in the, like, 46, 47, at that time, there was a major book, Gentleman's Agreement, which was quickly turned into a movie starring Gregory Peck, about anti-Semitic undercurrent and overcurrent in Connecticut and New York. And Peck played a magazine writer who pretended to be Jewish for X number of weeks. And in fact, there's a line in there where Peck says, somebody asked him, "What are you going to call your magazine series?" He said, "Oh, something like I was a Jewish guy for 6 weeks or something." And you know, and they ended up with "I was a Negro in the South for 30 days," and it's almost like an echo of it. But you say he did not necessarily read that book, or he didn't like the, wow, I'm going to do this for as a black person.
Daddy always was concerned about the underdog and the injustice. When we first moved, or long before I was born, when he and Ronnie first moved down to Boone Township, I guess the president of the local country club, by that time Daddy had something of a reputation. The president of the local country club came to him and asked, you know, would you and your wife care to join the country club? And Daddy said, you and the Jews? And the guy said, no. He said, then I wouldn't want to join your club. This was his outlook. This is the way he felt. You know, you would see, even in West Virginia, we got small incidents, or small to us, of no Negroes or whites only. These things bothered Daddy. And, you know, he thought he had a great imagination, and he, I think, was a frustrated actor and loved to play parts. And this was something that he could do something good with and have a lot of fun playing a part.
And what he did was, he came up with the idea, took it to the publishers, and he was, your dad was the star. When he wrote series, when one of his series came out, like his Black Market Meat Salesman series, when that came out, the paper would sell 10, 20, 30,000 more copies, and that was a big deal at the time.
So he was like a muckraker.
He had a muckraker streak in him, didn't he? But he was also a great fiction writer. He wrote Pulp Fiction when he was a kid. when he was young, and he was really a combination of a good fiction writer and a great reporter. And on top of that, I would argue he had like the motives of an op-ed writer or an editorial writer. He didn't write things and sort of say authorities think this.
Right.
He became the expert. If he was writing about that, about buying and selling of black market meat during wartime, and he took out his false teeth and he bought that cheap hat from Sears. He got an old coat and he rented a truck and he bought a ton of meat.
That was not
Oh, and but anyway, when he wrote up his story, he wrote it with such authority that the OPA, which is the Office of Price Administration, which was supposed to be policing all goods and services during World War II, and with the ration stamps and all that stuff, they called him in, remember, and they called him up on the stand and they said, what do you? After one day, his story, it was like a 6-part series. First day, they called him up and they said, up on the hearing stand or whatever, and they said, tell us what you found. He said, it's all in my series and it's coming out the next week. And he would only talk to the feds in D.C., the big shots of the OP. Office of President.